5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer. And I know I'm a couple days late. Blame it on a power outage from a storm that came by. But I did finally get my hands on the 3rd issue of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. As usual, I'm buying up the variant covers because, come on, how often are we going to get images of these monsters and these heroes together? So having read the issue at this point, I will say that in terms of plot, not a whole lot happens. It's still mostly action. We still are having to deal with the fact that the heroes don't actually know what's going on. We're 3 issues in at this point. Nobody has said the words Godzilla or Kong, so I'm a little bit weirded out by that. Like, how can we really have gone this far and our characters still don't know what's going on? To a certain degree they do know, because it's a very basic, straightforward situation. Giant monsters have shown up. Heroes have to deal with them. But you'd think they'd have figured out more by this point. Then again, we're only 3 issues in. I think there's supposed to be, 7 total? So we're not even technically at the halfway point. I guess depending on how you divide it up. But at this point, it's still mostly just focused on the action and seeing how the other heroes fare against the other monsters. Issue 2, of course, the primary focus was on Superman fighting Godzilla and Batman and the rest of the Bat family fighting Camazotz. Here we get to see Flash, Green Lantern, and for a brief moment Supergirl trying to deal with Scylla, while Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl go to Themyscira to deal with Behemoth. And the result is that Flash and Green Lantern are basically still struggling, whereas Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl kind of restrain Behemoth, but then Behemoth just kind of leaves on his own. They say that something is calling him. It might be Godzilla, it might be something else entirely, but that didn't really solve the question of whether or not they could defeat him. However, this issue does confirm that Godzilla apparently killed Superman. Except not really. We all know that Superman's not going to stay dead, right? Come on. He's come back from the dead before, let's not kid ourselves. Plus, the issue keeps saying that they got to get him to the Fortress of Solitude, because apparently, they don't say it out loud, but clearly they're bringing him there so they can bring him back. There's some kind of contingency plan for in case something kills him, so they can bring him back somehow. So Superman is not going to stay dead. For now, he is. And I know that some people are probably upset by that because, Superman's the most powerful hero in the DC universe, right? For him to get defeated by Godzilla, I know that there were people who were doing power scaling before the comics came out, and they're probably calling foul right now, but let's not forget, this is actually a very common tactic in DC Comics. Heck, it's a common tactic in media that's based on the DC Comics, but in other mediums. The cartoons, the movies, things like that. You see, the challenge that faces anyone writing a Justice League story is to answer the question of why all these heroes need to come together and work as a team in a world where Superman exists. And Superman is the most powerful hero, which means he can basically, or at least maybe not can solve the problem on his own, but you would think he should be able to. And the most commonly reached answer, which was especially highlighted for the animated series that was part of the DCAU, was you have to have Superman taken out of the fight at some point. Have the villains knock Superman down and have him not be able to get back up right away. And that's what tells people, all right, this is a real threat we're facing. If Superman was just laid flat, then we are really in it deep. Really, the only place I've ever seen that inverted is in the DCEU version of Justice League. Both the inferior theatrical cut and the far superior Snyder cut. Both cases, Superman is treated not as the high water mark where we know things are bad, but rather the linchpin to success. He's what comes in when the rest of the heroes are overwhelmed and they need somebody to turn the tide. But that's not frequently practiced. The more common practice is to have Superman go in and get taken out first, which justifies the other heroes having to come together and either fight without him or fight with him. So that's what this comic has done. And yes, the Bat family managed to take out Camazotz, but all this really tells our heroes in context is that these monsters are not all equally powerful. They might very well have just taken out an especially weak one, because another one of them just took down their big hitter. Their heavy hitter is down. So the situation has been escalated. That's the purpose this serves. Superman doesn't have to be weaker for that to be the case. Although, it does mean that this version of Godzilla is especially powerful. Then again, we already knew that. Character development is almost nil in this issue because, again, it's mostly action. We have a continuing bickering relationship between Hal Jordan and Barry Allen, which, honestly, Hal is coming across as a real jerk. I don't know what's going on in this book, but the writers must have really hated Hal Jordan because they are not doing him any favors. Like, every time Hal opens his mouth in this book, I'm waiting for somebody to punch him just to shut him up. He is, like, not likable here. I'm really kind of surprised. I thought the worst that Green Lantern could ever get was just kind of bland, particularly Hal Jordan's version. Although, I mean, there was that one time he went completely insane and killed the rest of the Corps, sure. But, like, here he's just kind of a jerk. There's no other way to say it. He's still part of the team, but I do not like his portrayal here. That, I think, so far is my biggest critique with this overall comic. Hal Jordan was done dirty. Meanwhile, Green Arrow is still on Skull Island, and he's just kind of trying to survive, I guess. I'm half expecting he's going to be the one who winds up filling everybody in on what's going on, because we established back in issue 1 that there's a Monarch facility on Skull Island, and since all of Skull Island was transported to the DC universe, I'm assuming that outpost is still there. And I was also assuming that in this issue he'd finally come across it and say, oh hey, these things have names, everybody. Here, listen to this. There's a thing called a Godzilla and a Kong. But that didn't happen this time, so maybe next time. Although we also get an interesting moment where Kong finally comes back and he has an interaction with Supergirl, which feels like it must have been done deliberately because, of course, we all know that historically King Kong has a thing for blondes, Supergirl is blonde, and there is this moment where, like, he starts to reach for her and she swats his hand away, and of course she's the only woman ever who could swat Kong's hand away and have it actually hurt. So, nice illusion there, I will say. Although it just kind of peters out. There's no real conclusion to it in this issue. I'm assuming it will resume next issue. We're going to see what exactly Kong and Supergirl's dynamic will wind up being. No sign of Grodd, though I was expecting he was still on Skull Island. I'm sure he'll pop up as well. Maybe he and Green Arrow will wind up in the facility at the same time, and they'll maybe form an uneasy truce just until they figure out what's going on. I'm just speculating here. Curiously, it seems like the Legion of Doom is also trying to undo all of this. At least some of its members are. They're trying to find Toyman and find the Wishing Stone, whatever it's called, I don't remember. I'm just doing this off the cuff. So, Dreamstone, isn't it? Whatever. They're trying to find them, so basically, I guess it can be undone, because these monsters can't really be controlled. They thought they were against this whole idea of bringing the monsters to their universe from the beginning. I don't know if they're actually going to wind up allying with the Justice League at any point, but I don't know, I guess we'll see. Although Lex Luthor isn't part of this search, turns out he's looking for something else, and he found it. This is perhaps the biggest deal of the whole issue, because on the very last page, Lex Luthor in the Chihuahuan Desert finds the eye of Mechagodzilla. And that is absolutely what this thing is. Same weird red color, same shape, that is clearly Mechagodzilla's eye. Which means Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong is going to be the first MonsterVerse comic book where a big-name monster other than Godzilla or Kong makes an official appearance. If you've been keeping up with the prequel MonsterVerse comics, you'll know that while plenty of the original Titans and various monsters show up, both in the Godzilla books and in the Kong books, none of the other monsters have. The rest of the Big Five have maybe been alluded to, but never actually shown. Like, Kingdom Kong makes reference to King Ghidorah, but never calls him by name, and of course doesn't show him. Godzilla Dominion has a panel that might be alluding to Mothra, but it's really vague. And we don't actually see Mothra, at least not clearly. It's just sort of a bright white flash, so it might be Mothra, or it might be Serizawa, who is in the previous panel. Other than that, though, none of the others have appeared. Obviously, Mechagodzilla wasn't going to appear in the prequels. Ghidorah, like I mentioned, alluded to but not shown or named. Rodan, nowhere to be seen at all. And yet here we are in the midst of this crossover that I'm sure people were hoping for, but no one actually expected to happen. And all of a sudden, here's Mechagodzilla. Like, at first, I think most of us were pretty sure that it was going to be Godzilla, Kong, and all the original monsters, whether they were from the comics or from the movies. But now Mechagodzilla is clearly here, and I don't think they're going to show his eye and then have it not be a thing. Clearly, I think Lex Luthor is going to rebuild Mechagodzilla, maybe install some kryptonite in him, thinking that he can control it, and then of course he's going to lose control. I'm pretty sure I can see where this is going to go. Just because I think I can predict it, and I could be wrong, but just because I think I know where it's going doesn't mean I'm not looking forward to seeing how it gets there. Hopefully it's still worth the journey. But all the same, here we are. Mechagodzilla is showing up. Does that mean the others will? That is the big question. Now, I'm of two minds about this. First is the possibility that maybe they've only decided to bring in Mechagodzilla. I'm looking at the title and I've always thought, why do they call it Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong? Other than because Godzilla vs. Kong was a movie that was very much in the public eye at this point. And I wonder if perhaps it's because Godzilla vs. Kong is the movie that they're focusing on. I mean, obviously they've included kaiju and titans from King of the Monsters, and Kong Skull Island, of course. But if for some reason there was some kind of behind-the-scenes dealing where they said you can pick which monsters you want, like by picking a movie, but you can't have all of them, so choose wisely, and they said, well, if we're going to have both Godzilla and Kong in here, we may as well go for Godzilla vs. Kong and bring in Mechagodzilla, then maybe Mechagodzilla is the only one who will appear. But on the other hand, this crossover is kind of a historic moment. I mean, in comics and the kaiju fandom, certainly. So I feel like it would be a missed opportunity if the others didn't show up. They might still not, of course, but now we have evidence that it's not impossible. At the very least, I'm hoping that Mothra and Rodan show up. Will Ghidorah show up too? In this event, it's possible, but also not. Well, we all know, if you've seen the movies, that King Ghidorah has to die in order for Mechagodzilla to be built and functional. But at the same time, it was established in the first issue that we're clearly not sticking to the hard continuity of the MonsterVerse. This issue only further confirms it. Mechagodzilla has already been destroyed, but Skull Island hasn't been destroyed yet. So maybe, if they're going to bring in the others, we could see a finale in which King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla are side by side. It's possible. How likely, I don't know at this point. But then again, I didn't think, or at least wasn't hanging my hat on the idea that any big-name monsters other than Godzilla and Kong were going to show up. Yet here we are. So who knows? Beyond that, I mean, it's the third chapter. Like I said, not a whole lot happens in terms of plot progression or character development. Action certainly keeps going forward, but there's not all that much else to say about the issue at this point. I'm still intrigued. I still am curious to see where it's going. I don't think this is going to be like the deepest, most amazing comic ever, but so far it's still fun. It's still got my attention. All it has to do is be entertaining and continue to deliver on the promise of seeing these iconic superheroes and these iconic monsters duking it out, and it will have done its job. Now, when I went to the comic book store to get this issue, I did pick up something else, but this will have to get a review of its own. For now, though, I will say that, again, the third issue of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong is still going relatively strong, and I'm looking forward to the fourth issue coming out next month. Or next year. At this point, they're one and the same. Anyway, that's where I stand at this point. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.